As the days turned into weeks, the tension in Birchwood Drive only grew thicker. The tree in the clubhouse had become more than just a symbol. It was a lightning rod, sparking conversations that had long been buried under layers of politeness and fear. Neighbors who rarely spoke to each other now gathered in clusters, debating everything from HOA policies to the broader question of what kind of community we wanted to live in. Some praised my boldness, saying it was high time someone stood up to the board's iron grip. Others whispered disapprovingly, worried that my actions would lead to chaos or retaliation. My mailbox became a battleground of its own. Anonymous notes criticizing me mixed with heartfelt letters of support. At home, the strain began to show. Alex, my husband, was increasingly uneasy. "Sarah," he said one night as we sat at the kitchen table, "I get why you're doing this, but are you sure it's worth it? You're making enemies here. What happens when they decide to push back harder?" His concern wasn't unfounded. Already, there were signs of backlash. Someone egged our house late one evening, leaving streaks of dried yolk on the siding. Another morning, I found a flyer taped to our front door, accusing me of disrupting harmony and urging me to apologize for my behavior. The message was anonymous, but the implication was clear: fall in line or face the consequences. It was unsettling, to say the least. Every creak of the floorboards at night made me wonder if someone was lurking outside. Yet despite the unease, I couldn't bring myself to back down. Giving in would mean letting them win, and I wasn't ready for that. What surprised me most, though, was how divided the neighborhood seemed. On one side were those who supported me openly, bringing food to our doorstep or stopping by to offer words of encouragement. One elderly neighbor, Mr. Carter, even offered to help cover legal costs if things escalated further. "You're fighting for all of us," he told me firmly. "Don't let them scare you into silence." On the other side were those who viewed me as a troublemaker, someone stirring up unnecessary drama. They avoided eye contact or muttered complaints about how my stunt was causing headaches for everyone. A few even reported me anonymously to the HOA, citing vague concerns about safety and property values. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were invoking the same hollow arguments the board used to justify cutting down my oak in the first place. Amidst the chaos, Mrs. Dunlap tried to regain control. She called another meeting, this time inviting residents to voice their opinions about recent events. Predictably, the session devolved into heated arguments. Supporters defended my actions, pointing out years of unchecked authority and questionable decisions by the board. Opponents accused me of selfishness, claiming my defiance undermined the sense of order that held the neighborhood together. Through it all, Mrs. Dunlap sat stiffly at the head of the table, her usual composure cracking under the weight of dissent. Afterward, I felt drained but oddly hopeful. For every harsh word thrown my way, there was a gesture of solidarity, a kind smile, a pat on the shoulder, a promise to stand with me no matter what. Slowly, I realized something important. I wasn't alone anymore. This fight wasn't just about a tree or even about me. It was about something bigger, a shared desire for fairness, transparency, and respect. One afternoon, as I stood watering the small sapling I'd planted in memory of the oak, Mrs. Patel approached again. This time, she didn't hesitate before speaking. "We need to do something," she said quietly. "Something organized. If enough of us speak up, maybe we can force real change." Her words lit a fire in me. Maybe this moment of conflict could be an opportunity, not just to challenge the status quo, but to build something better. Together. When we first moved into our home on Birchwood Drive, there was one thing that stood out more than anything else: the massive oak tree in the front yard. It wasn't just a tree. It felt like a piece of history, a living monument that had been there long before any of us arrived. 100 years old, its branches stretched wide and strong, creating shade that covered half the yard. It was the kind of tree you'd see in storybooks. Gnarled roots twisting above the ground, leaves rustling softly in the breeze. My kids loved climbing it when they were younger, giggling as they perched on thick limbs like little adventurers. For me, It was my quiet escape. On weekends, I'd sit beneath it with a cup of coffee, watching sunlight dance through the canopy. That tree wasn't just part of the house, it was part of our family. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, seemed to love it too. At least, that's what they always said. Every year during their meetings, they called it an iconic feature of the neighborhood. They even included pictures of it in their brochures for new residents. So, imagine my shock one morning when I woke up to the sound of chainsaws slicing through the stillness of dawn. By the time I got outside, it was already gone. Just like that. No warning, no explanation. All that remained was a jagged stump and a pile of sawdust scattered across the grass. The sight made my stomach churn. How could something so big, so important, disappear overnight without anyone saying a word? I marched straight to the HOA office, demanding answers. Their response: a shrug and some vague excuse about how the tree posed a potential hazard. Potential hazard. Really? This tree had survived storms, droughts, and decades of changing seasons. The only hazard I saw was the group of people who decided they could take it down without consulting anyone. When I pressed them further, they acted like it was no big deal. "It's just a tree," Mrs. Dunlop, the HOA president, told me with a dismissive wave of her hand. Just a tree. To them, maybe. But to me, it was so much more. That night, I sat on the porch staring at the empty space where the oak used to stand. Memories flooded back. The laughter of my children playing tag around its trunk. The peaceful afternoons spent reading under its shade. The way its golden leaves lit up the entire street every fall. Now, all of that was gone. Destroyed because someone decided it didn't fit their vision of perfection anymore. The injustice burned inside me. Who gave them the right to make such decisions? Why didn't they ask us, the people who lived here, what we thought? As I sat there stewing, an idea began to form, a small spark of rebellion flickering in the back of my mind. What if I could bring the tree back? Not literally, of course. Once a tree is cut down, it's gone forever. But what if I could do something equally bold, something that would force the HOA to face what they'd done? Something that would remind everyone, including them, that nature doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to all of us. By the next morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The idea that had started as a small spark in my mind quickly grew into a full-blown plan. I couldn't bring the tree back to life, but I could make sure its presence was felt in a way no one would forget. That night, after everyone else in the house was asleep, I grabbed my phone and started researching. Could any part of the oak still be saved? Was there a way to salvage even a fragment of what they'd taken from me? I reached out to a local arborist named Greg, who specialized in tree preservation. When I explained the situation, he agreed to meet me at the site early the next morning. Together, we sifted through the remains of the felled oak. To my relief, some parts were still usable. A section of the trunk with intact bark and roots, along with smaller branches that hadn't been completely destroyed. Greg assured me these could serve as the foundation for something new. "It's not ideal," he said, brushing sawdust off his hands. "But if you're determined, we can try." Determined didn't even begin to describe how I felt. With Greg's help, I arranged for a crane rental and enlisted 2 close friends, both owed me favors, to assist with the heavy lifting. We worked under the cover of darkness, carefully loading the salvaged pieces of the tree onto a flat truck. The operation felt almost comical, like a scene from a heist movie. But this wasn't about theft. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen. Our destination: the HOA Clubhouse lobby. It was the perfect spot, symbolic, central, impossible to ignore. As we hauled the largest piece of the trunk inside, I couldn't help but smile. By sunrise, the once pristine lobby looked like a forest had erupted within its walls. The massive chunk of oak stood upright, surrounded by smaller branches arranged artistically around it. To top it off, I left a handwritten note taped to the trunk. "If you're going to destroy nature, maybe you should live with it instead." Word spread fast. By mid-morning, neighbors were gathering outside the clubhouse, buzzing with excitement. Some laughed openly, snapping photos and sharing them on social media. Others whispered nervously, unsure whether to applaud or criticize. Inside, chaos reigned. The HOA board members arrived one by one, their faces turning pale as they took in the surreal sight. Mrs. Dunlop, the president, stormed out looking flustered. She spotted me leaning casually against my car and marched over, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. "This is outrageous," she exclaimed, pointing accusingly toward the clubhouse. "You can't just replant a tree in the lobby." I raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "Why not? It's still part of the community, isn't it?" Her face flushed red, but she couldn't argue. Instead, she resorted to threats. "This violates multiple regulations. You'll face fines, legal action, maybe even eviction." I crossed my arms, meeting her gaze steadily. "Oh, I'm familiar with your rules," I replied coolly. "Funny how none of them stopped you from cutting down a century-old oak without consulting anyone." Mrs. Dunlop opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, clearly flustered. She knew she was on shaky ground. While she muttered something about finding a solution, I walked away, feeling a mix of triumph and nervous energy. I'd made my point, loud and clear. Now, all that remained was to see how they'd react, and whether my bold move would inspire others to join me in standing up for what mattered. As the day wore on, I noticed more and more neighbors stopping by to check out the impromptu installation. Some offered words of encouragement, while others simply stared in awe. Whatever the outcome, one thing was certain: the HOA wouldn't soon forget the woman who brought a tree into their lobby. The days following the tree's unexpected appearance in the clubhouse were a whirlwind of reactions. The entire neighborhood seemed to be talking about it, and I couldn't step outside without hearing murmurs or catching sideways glances. Some people clapped me on the back, calling me brave or clever. Others avoided eye contact altogether, clearly unsure whether to cheer me on or distance themselves from the chaos I had unleashed. Social media exploded with photos of the rogue oak, hashtags like #Treegate and #HOA Revolt trending locally. Even strangers from nearby neighborhoods weighed in, praising my creativity or criticizing the HOA's heavy-handedness. For better or worse, I had become the center of attention. Inside the clubhouse, things weren't any calmer. The HOA scrambled to figure out what to do with their new decor. Mrs. Dunlop called an emergency meeting, demanding that the board come up with a solution. But the more they argued, the clearer it became that they were stuck. Removing the tree would only draw more negative publicity, but leaving it there felt like admitting defeat. Meanwhile, visitors continued to trickle in, snapping pictures and marveling at the absurdity of it all. One elderly neighbor joked that the lobby now looked like a nature exhibit, complete with bark and roots as far as the eye could see. Not everyone found humor in the situation, though. A handful of residents openly sided with the HOA, accusing me of being reckless and disruptive. They claimed my actions set a dangerous precedent, that if I could plant a tree inside the clubhouse, who knew what others might try next? Flyers appeared on mailboxes urging compliance with HOA rules, subtly implying that my stunt was irresponsible. At first, these criticisms stung. Did they really think I'd gone too far? Or were they just afraid to rock the boat themselves? But for every critic, there was someone else ready to defend me. Parents brought their kids to see the tree, explaining how it represented standing up for what you believe in. One young boy even left a drawing taped to the clubhouse door, a stick figure version of me triumphantly holding a tree above my head. It made me smile despite the stress. Slowly but surely, I began to realize that my act of defiance wasn't just about me anymore. It had sparked something bigger. People were starting to question the power dynamics in our community and wonder why decisions were made without consulting them. Mrs. Dunlop tried to regain control by issuing formal statements, reminding everyone of the importance of rules and order. She sent letters to homeowners, warning against further disruptions and hinting at unspecified consequences for those involved. Yet her words carried less weight than before. Neighbors whispered that she sounded desperate, grasping at straws to maintain authority. Her usual air of confidence seemed shaken, replaced by frustration and uncertainty. As tension simmered, I noticed subtle shifts in the atmosphere. Conversations among neighbors grew bolder, touching on topics that had long been considered off-limits. Complaints about the HOA's lack of transparency bubbled to the surface. Stories emerged about fines issued unfairly, requests ignored, and promises broken. What started as a personal grievance over a single tree was morphing into something much larger, a collective demand for accountability. Late one evening, as I watered the flowers in my garden, Mrs. Petal from down the street approached me. She hesitated for a moment, then smiled warmly. "You've stirred something up, haven't you?" she said, glancing toward the clubhouse. "I don't agree with everything you've done, but I admire your courage." Her words caught me off guard. Until then, I hadn't fully grasped the ripple effect of my actions. Maybe this wasn't just about reclaiming a tree after all. Maybe it was about planting seeds of change and seeing where they might grow. Mrs. Patel's suggestion lingered in my mind long after she'd left. "Something organized," she'd said. At first, the idea seemed overwhelming. How could we possibly organize an entire neighborhood against something as entrenched as the HOA? But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If enough people came together, neighbors who had silently resented the board's decisions for years, we might actually have a chance to create real change. The next day, I called a small meeting at my house. To my surprise, nearly a dozen neighbors showed up, eager to help. Mrs. Patel was there, along with Mr. Carter, a few young families, and even a couple of people I barely knew. We sat around my dining table, brainstorming ideas. Someone suggested starting a petition to demand reforms within the HOA. Another neighbor proposed organizing a town hall meeting where residents could voice their concerns directly to the board. By the end of the evening, we had a plan and a name for ourselves: Birchwood United. Over the following weeks, our little group worked tirelessly. We drafted a list of demands: term limits for board members, clearer guidelines for decision-making, and protection for natural landmarks like my oak tree. We printed petitions and distributed them door to door, explaining our goals and encouraging people to sign. At first, some hesitated, worried about potential backlash. But as the signatures piled up, momentum grew. Soon, hundreds of names filled the pages, each one a testament to growing frustration with the HOA's outdated ways. Meanwhile, word of our efforts spread beyond Birchwood Drive. Local news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a battle between everyday homeowners and unchecked authority. Reporters interviewed me, snapping photos of the clubhouse tree and the empty space in my yard where the oak once stood. The coverage brought attention and support from outside the neighborhood. Arborists offered free services to replant trees throughout Birchwood. Strangers sent letters and donations to help cover legal fees. Even former HOA members reached out, sharing stories of mismanagement and corruption behind closed doors. With public pressure mounting, we announced a town hall meeting to present our case. Flyers went up all over the neighborhood, inviting everyone to attend. On the day of the event, the clubhouse overflowed with people. Chairs lined every available space, and latecomers stood along the walls or spilled into the hallway. It was the largest gathering Birchwood had seen in years. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped to the podium, heart pounding but resolve steady. I held up a copy of the petition, its pages thick with signatures. "This isn't just about me," I began, my voice clear despite the nerves twisting in my stomach. "It's about all of us. For too long, we've let a handful of people dictate how we live, what we do, and even which trees get to survive. They took my oak, a piece of our history, and tried to silence anyone who questioned them. But they underestimated us." I paused, looking out at the sea of faces before me. Some nodded in agreement. Others listened intently, pens poised over notebooks. "We are stronger together," I continued. "And we won't stop until this neighborhood reflects the values we all cherish." fairness, transparency, and respect for each other and for the land we share. The room erupted in applause, cheers echoing off the walls. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. This fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But standing there, surrounded by neighbors who finally dared to speak up, I knew we were on the right path. Together, we were planting seeds, not just for new trees, but for a better future. The applause from the town hall meeting was exhilarating, but it didn't take long for reality to set in. The HOA wasn't about to back down without a fight. Within days, they retaliated by filing nuisance charges against me, claiming the clubhouse tree violated fire codes and structural safety standards. Lawyers' letters began arriving in waves, each one colder and more threatening than the last. Fines piled up, legal fees mounted, and stress seeped into every corner of my life. Nights became sleepless battles with worry, and arguments with Alex grew more frequent. "You're pushing too hard," he'd say, his voice tinged with frustration. "What if this costs us everything?" It wasn't just financial strain that weighed on me. It was the isolation. Some neighbors who had initially supported me started pulling away, fearing they'd be dragged into the conflict. Anonymous notes appeared again, this time warning me to stop before things got worse. One morning, I found my car keyed, the words "back OFF" scratched into the driver's side door. Fear crept in, whispering doubts I couldn't ignore. Was I being reckless? Selfish? Had I misjudged how far I could push before breaking? But then something remarkable happened. The backlash against the HOA's heavy-handed response began to outweigh their attempts to silence me. Local news outlets ran follow-up stories, highlighting the escalating feud and portraying the HOA as out-of-touch bullies. Social media buzzed with outrage over their tactics, with hashtags like #JusticeForBirchwood trending once again. Strangers from across town sent messages of support, sharing their own frustrations with similar organizations. Even some former HOA board members came forward, exposing years of mismanagement, favoritism, and questionable spending. Encouraged by the growing momentum, Birchwood United doubled down on our efforts. We organized fundraisers to cover legal costs, turning them into community events with live music, food trucks, and speeches from passionate residents. Kids sold lemonade with signs reading, "Save Our Trees," while older neighbors manned booths collecting signatures for reform petitions. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood transformed. People who had once kept to themselves now gathered regularly, united by a shared purpose. Conversations flowed freely, laughter filled the air, and a sense of camaraderie replaced the fear that had lingered for so long. Behind closed doors, cracks began to form within the HOA itself. Board members resigned one by one, citing moral objections or public pressure. Internal documents leaked, revealing details of lavish expenses paid for with homeowner dues, dinners at fancy restaurants, unnecessary renovations to the clubhouse, even personal gifts disguised as community investments. The revelations fueled further outrage, making it impossible for the remaining board members to defend their actions. Finally, after weeks of mounting tension, the HOA blinked. They agreed to negotiate, though reluctantly. Representatives from Birchwood United sat down with the board, hammering out terms for a settlement. In exchange for dropping all charges, they promised sweeping reforms: term limits for board members, stricter oversight of decisions, and the establishment of a fund dedicated to preserving natural landmarks throughout the neighborhood. Most importantly, they officially acknowledged the harm caused by cutting down my oak and vowed to prevent such mistakes in the future. As part of the agreement, I was given permission to replant a new sapling in my yard, using seeds salvaged from the original tree. It wasn't the same, of course. Nothing could replace what had been lost. But standing in the empty space where the oak once stood, holding the tiny sprout in my hands, I felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't just a tree. It was a promise that we, as a community, would never let anyone take away our voice again. Though the battle wasn't easy, it taught me something invaluable. When people come together, Even the smallest seed of courage can grow into something unstoppable. And sometimes, the roots we plant today become the foundation for tomorrow's change. The clubhouse tree, the one that had started it all, eventually found a new home in the community park. With the HOA's reluctant blessing, we transformed the space into a tribute to resilience and unity. The massive trunk was placed at the center of the park, surrounded by benches and walking paths. Smaller branches were repurposed as part of a decorative fence, their weathered bark serving as a reminder of what we fought for. A plaque was installed nearby, engraved with simple words, "Roots run deep." It wasn't just about my oak anymore. It was about every neighbor who had stood together to demand better. On a crisp autumn morning, I stood beneath the young sapling I planted in my yard. Its leaves shimmered golden in the sunlight, a quiet promise of growth and renewal. Alex came outside with 2 cups of coffee, handing me one before leaning against the porch railing. "It's starting to look like home again," he said softly, nodding toward the tiny tree. His tone carried none of the tension from weeks before, only relief, maybe even pride. For the first time in months, our lives felt peaceful again. The neighborhood had changed too. Conversations no longer revolved around rules or restrictions. Instead, they focused on plans for the future. Families organized weekend cleanups in the park, planting flowers and trimming hedges. Kids raced through the playground, laughing without a care in the world. Even Mrs. Dunlop, now replaced as OA president, seemed less imposing when she passed by. She never apologized directly, but her occasional nods in my direction suggested a grudging respect. One afternoon, Mrs. Patel invited me to join her for a walk in the park. As we strolled along the path, she paused near the clubhouse tree and smiled. "You know," she said, running her fingers over the rough bark, "this isn't just a symbol of rebellion anymore. It's a symbol of hope. People see it and remember what we accomplished together." Her words stayed with me long after our walk ended. Hope, that was exactly what this fight had given us. Not just for Birchwood Drive, but for communities everywhere. We proved that standing up for what you believe in doesn't have to mean standing alone. When enough voices rise together, change becomes possible. Of course, not everything was perfect. Some neighbors still harbored resentment, whispering disapproval whenever I walked by. Others clung to old habits, reluctant to embrace the reforms fully. But progress isn't always immediate or easy. What mattered most was that we had taken the first step. Together, we had shown that fairness and compassion could coexist with structure and order. As winter approached, I found myself sitting under the young sapling more often, watching its delicate branches sway in the breeze. Each leaf was a testament to survival, a reminder of how far we'd come. My kids joined me sometimes, marveling at how quickly the tree was growing. "Do you think it'll be as big as the old one someday?" my youngest asked one day, his eyes wide with wonder. "I don't know," I replied honestly, "but if we take care of it, maybe it will." That was the lesson I wanted them, and everyone, to take away from this experience. Change takes time, patience, and effort. Sometimes it requires standing your ground when others try to push you down. And sometimes it means planting roots where no one expects them to grow. By spring, the park had become a gathering place for the entire neighborhood. Picnics, festivals, and outdoor movie nights brought people together in ways I hadn't seen before. Laughter echoed through the trees, filling the air with warmth and connection. Standing there amidst it all, I realized something profound. The battle hadn't just been about saving a tree or reforming an organization. It had been about rediscovering what truly mattered: the bonds we share, the beauty of nature, and the courage to stand up for what's right. And so, life on Birchwood Drive moved forward, not perfectly, but with purpose. The scars of the past remained, visible reminders of the struggles we'd faced. But alongside those scars were signs of healing, new friendships, fresh starts, and a renewed sense of belonging. That little sapling in my yard kept growing, reaching toward the sky. Just like us, it was determined to thrive.